Joel Schumacher, a director who helped define a decade of cinema with films like The Lost Boys and St. Elmo's Fire, might be one of the most undeservedly vilified filmmakers of the last 50 years. While his filmography isn't exactly littered with masterpieces, Schumacher proved to be one of the most versatile and popular directors of the 1980s and 1990s, with the latter decade seeing him swap mullets, fangs, and teenage angst for suits, suspense, and psychological material, starting with 1993's Falling Down, which starred Michael Douglas as a tortured individual who comes off the rails only to discover that he is the villain of his own story. Schumacher followed this up with two popular John Grisham adaptations, 1993's The Client, starring Susan Sarandon and Tommy Lee Jones, and A Time to Kill, which may just hold the Guinness World Record for being the sweatiest movie of all time. Seriously, that is one extremely moist picture. While there wouldn't be any other big novel adaptations for Schumacher following his Grisham years, he pretty much remained in the thriller space for the remainder of his career, turning out neat genre exercises like the Nicolas Cage leather thriller 8mm and the Colin Farrell starring Phone Booth. Good, solid, and hugely popular cinema that cemented the director's box office bona fides and middling critical reputation. Schumacher himself was unperturbed by the lack of love from critics, stating in a 2019 interview with Vulture that having a film the critics disliked spread like fire at the box office is, quote, the greatest thing that can happen to you because it reminds you who you made the movie for. He passed away a year later at the age of 80. And as a filmmaker, I still think he's someone that we as film fans don't appreciate as much as we should. But despite Schumacher's career being dominated by mid-budget thrillers and 80s gloss, he's been defined mostly in the online sphere for two films in particular, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Infamous for coming in the wake of Tim Burton's brilliantly gothic reimagining of The Dark Knight, and replacing that vision with a cacophony of neon, nipple, and George Clooney. Internet consensus has not been kind to the reputation of either film, sandwiched as they are between two definitive and beloved cinematic depictions of the character, and you don't have to be 60s Batman villain egghead to understand why. Batman Forever and Batman and Robin do not maintain tonal continuity with the last 30 years of the Caped Crusaders cinematic depictions. They were lighter, goofier, and totally gonzo, born out of a commercial need to avoid repeating the controversy that surrounded Batman Returns by catering more explicitly towards children. But that doesn't make them bad. There is, in fact, a lot to love about Schumacher's Batman, from the set and costume design to the overall approach taken when it comes to the character's psychology and his relationship with his adversaries. And no, I'm not just talking about Forever here. The same applies to Batman and Robin, which I must say, while being in Chris O'Donnell's own words a toy commercial, remains one of the most faithful and heartening depictions of Bruce Wayne's attitude to superheroics we've ever seen on screen. I'll spend most of this video obviously getting into the how and why I think the reputation of these films is unearned, but certainly the main thing I want to drive at is that there's a very narrow definition online of what Batman should and shouldn't be, enforced by decades of modern comic book material and live-action depictions made in the mold of Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, whose masterwork Batman Year One changed the landscape of DC Comics. And those depictions are, for the most part, great. I love me some Dark Batman, but Dark Batman is like one fraction of what the character is. It's a significant portion and definitive for a reason, but the unyielding focus on that particular aspect of the character has obliterated the heterogeneous nature of Batman as an entity, which historically has fluctuated between genres and tones fairly seamlessly. It's that narrow definition that cast the Silver Age comics, the 60s show, and Schumacher's films as aberrant offerings, when the actual history of the character stands in direct opposition to that. In other words, if you think that Joel Schumacher's Batman isn't proper Batman, well, think again. Burton's sequel, while financially and critically successful, and also my favourite live-action Batman film, fell short of its predecessor's box office gross by almost $150 million, accruing controversy for its dark tone and macabre visuals, which stood in contrast to the wave of merchandising and Happy Meal toys that were very much geared towards children. While a third Batman film was a given, what was less certain was whether or not Burton would return as director. As told in Batman Forever, the story behind the surprise hit nobody really wanted by The Hollywood Reporter's Aaron Couch, Burton and Warner Bros. Soon agreed that the Beetlejuice director would step back and take on a producing role for the third Batman film, which was then also set to see Keaton reprise his role as Bruce Wayne. Keaton, however, departed from the project, later stating in an appearance on the Backstage podcast that he hadn't gelled with Schumacher's vision for the character. Quote, "He asked me, I don't understand why everything has to be so dark and everything so sad. And I went, wait a minute, do you know how this guy got to be Batman? Have you read? I mean, it's pretty simple." With Keaton gone, Schumacher turned to Val Kilmer, who had impressed in his role as Doc Holliday in 1993's Tombstone. In his wake came Tommy Lee Jones as Harvey Dent / Two-Face, Jim Carrey as Edward Nygma / The Riddler, after the production failed to secure the services of Robin Williams, Chris O'Donnell as Dick Grayson / Robin, and Nicole Kidman as psychologist Dr. Chase Meridian. Continuity was maintained with the Burton pictures, the retention of Michael Gough as Alfred and Pat Hingle as Commissioner Gordon, but it was clear from the beginning that Forever was a break from what came before. Schumacher was drawn to the vibrancy of Batman's comics pre-Miller, and that was duly reflected on the screen, with Gotham shedding its gothic persona for a neon-drenched operatic world of tomorrow, masterminded by production designer Barbara Ling, and complemented by cinematographer Steven Goldblatt's rock and roll photography. Forever today is synonymous with its banger soundtrack, led by U2's Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me, and Seal's Kiss from a Rose, so it's only fitting that the film itself was lit like a concert. As Goldblatt recounted to THR, quote, "I had a concert lighting guy and his crew. Now, what that means is I could adjust the color and the intensity, the direction and the diffusion of each lamp without having to go to each lamp. They were all fed down to consoles on the stage floor. We could move very, very quickly. The conventional way could have taken days. It gave it that rock and roll comic book look." To some, it might be gaudy excess, but Forever's reverse polarity remains its most striking and essential feature. Writ large, this imagery illustrated a softening of the edges Burton brought to The Dark Knight. Absolutely. Beyond Schumacher's like of the lighter aspects of the source material though, the architecture of his Gotham, adorned with Olympian statues and Art Deco skyscrapers, and ruled by men of dual identities, communicated another core aspect of his approach to the character: psychological introspection. Keaton may have left the film over concerns regarding the depth of Bruce's character in Schumacher's eyes, but Forever is a film deeply mired in that psychology. It was just punctuated by light and noise, and lots of Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey doing whatever the hell this is. These psychological elements are a key feature of the final cut, codified by Bruce's new psychologist love interest, two villains who cannot tame ego and alter ego, and an arc for Bats that forces him to reconcile his dual identity. As he says triumphantly to Riddler in the finale, quote, You see, I'm both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Not because I have to be, now because I choose to be. Wow, is that a cliche-busting take on Batman's identity in 1995's Batman Forever? Who'da thunk it? Now, admittedly, and as briefly mentioned just before, these elements of Schumacher's film take a place in the background rather than the foreground. They are secondary, not primary, to a film that Schumacher was behooved to make in service of branding and merchandise, later echoed by Val Kilmer in his autobiographical documentary Val, which recounts his struggles playing Batman and the idea that he, as a person, was subsumed into that entity, and that he was playing an action figure rather than an actual flesh and blood human being. Kilmer's disappointment regarding his time as Batman is totally understandable, despite giving what I would say is, and contrary to the beliefs of Bowling for Soup, a strong performance as the character. What aggravates these frustrations is that there does exist a version of Batman Forever where Bruce Wayne's interiority is placed more prominently in the furniture of the film, and where those more exaggerated elements are dialed back just a smidge. This cut, referred to in online circles as the Schumacher cut, has been screened privately before, and there's a vocal campaign for Warner Bros. To complete Schumacher's work and release it in much the same way the studio did with Zack Snyder's Justice League. Akiva Goldsman, one of the screenwriters behind Forever, has even held conversations with WB to get it completed, but the current status of that whole thing as of October 2024 is still uncertain. While the general public hasn't been able to take a peek behind the grandfather clock and descend the stairs to see what could have been with that film, Schumacher was vocal regarding a lot of the material he originally shot for it that didn't end up making the cut, honing in on Bruce's flashbacks and the greater efforts made to delve into the dichotomy of his identity. One infamously cut scene involved Bruce confronting a giant manifestation of a bat, which was shown off in promo materials for the film and is partially what sparked the drive from Batman fans to see what Schumacher's original vision may have looked like. Again, these elements are present in the text we're all familiar with, but to see them blown up and those wilder elements toned down slightly does give an insight into the obscure depths of Schumacher's interpretation. Regardless of the evolving tone of Batman Forever, the film was a phenomenon. While falling short of the transformative box office gross of Batman '89, it exceeded Return's popularity and even smashed records for the biggest opening weekend of all time. Critics were less kind, but Warner Bros. Gambit had paid off. Batman was king yet again, and the next steps should, in theory, have been a walk in the park. Instead, Schumacher found himself dangling 30 feet in the air, and with a machine gun wielding Tommy Lee Jones stood underneath. Only that gun didn't fire bullets, but like merchandising deals. Now, a lot of you may know about Schumacher's plans for a third Batman film had Batman and Robin not ended as a commercial disappointment. Although that element is also slightly exaggerated, but I'll get to that in a bit. The pitch was Batman Unchained, and would have seen the titanic trio of Batman, now George Clooney, Robin, still Chris O'Donnell, and Batgirl, Alicia Silverstone, taking on the Scarecrow and Harley Quinn, continuing the influence from Batman animated series visible in Batman and Robin's depiction of Mr. Freeze, only this time with a slight twist that Harley would have been Joker's daughter. Schumacher was aiming for darker ground with this one, as he was with earlier concepts for Batman Forever, but it never came to fruition, which is also what happened to his dark pitch for what became Batman and Robin. Yeah, that Batman and Robin. This one, right behind me right now. In Schumacher's own words, quote, "After Forever's success, I wanted to do The Dark Knight. It was gonna be very dark. I remember going to the set of Face Off and asking Nick Cage to play the Scarecrow. The studio, and I'm not sure the audience, was in a frame of mind to go too dark with Batman at that time." This is sort of tangential to the wider point I'm trying to make here, but if there was any doubt about where Schumacher's instincts on Batman were, and to me they sound distinctly Bronze Age in the kind of Dennis O'Neil, Neil Adams, Steve Englehart vein, well, there you have it. This was not a guy who was trying to sand the edges off the character, but someone who in fact tried to accommodate them within the confines the studio had erected. Now, the thing is, those parameters, while a hindrance, I think it's fair to say, aren't inherently bad. And I think that's something Schumacher reconciled with in the years following the release of Forever and Batman and Robin. In a conversation with Forbes in 2016, Schumacher had this to say about the psychological aspects he touched on in his Bat films. The other thing you mentioned is part of what my mandate was, to make a Batman for the whole family. The part you're mentioning about Bruce Wayne and his internal struggles, etc., were part of what I thought was really necessary to Batman, to his life. If people don't want to see that, they don't have to. I always hope to make a film on many levels. Maybe some think I don't, maybe some think I do. But in other words, if people want to see a movie and they just like it because it's fun, that's fine with me. If they want to read things into it that maybe I haven't even put in there, that's fine too, because the audience is always right. Apart from this being very validating for me personally, because I love to be told that I'm always right, I think this provides a fitting summary for Schumacher's Batman overall. Flawed as the films are, if you want to go searching for the nuance, you can find it. You don't have to, but it's there. And that doesn't just apply to Batman Forever. It applies to Batman and Robin as well, which has retained its pariah status for far too long, and, to be honest, a lot of that backlash feels like residual gay panic from 3 decades ago. So the costumes have bat nipples, and we get a few ass shots of Batman and Robin. If those are your biggest problems with the film, then please just admit that you're taking umbrage with the gay male gaze and not judging the film on any technical merit. Seriously, I'm bored with everyone acting like this isn't a feature of the discourse, because it's still going on, and it's really stupid. It's there during Batman and Robin's immediate reception, and even the new Batman Adventures saw fit to make a tasteless dig at Schumacher in its episode Legends of the Dark Knight, where a young, gay-coded character called Joel talks up his love of Batman's muscles and his gravity-defying Batmobile, only to be dismissed by the trio of leads, who hit him with a "Sure, Joel," before going on their way. At best, the shorthand of the scene serves to invalidate Schumacher's contributions to the Batman mythos. At worst, it's homophobia, directed towards an openly gay director, and one whose creative vision for Batman seemed to channel facets of LGBTQ culture, whether that was the assertion of male physicality in Batman and Robin's costumes, or the drag motifs of Poison Ivy's deliciously over-the-top wardrobe. In essence, the scene kind of exemplifies every issue I have with the dismissive critiques of Schumacher's Batman that have prevailed online for the last 2 decades or so. This obviously isn't me casting moral aspersions about people who don't like these films, because they are an acquired taste, but having grown up in the 2000s internet, it would be disingenuous to argue that homophobia hasn't been a fixture of how the reputation of these films has developed over time. Again, there is plenty of legitimate criticism, but some of it does hinge on Batman and Robin's alleged gayness, and that is really tedious, because the cumulative effect of that and the film's contemporary critical and commercial drubbing, cemented by Schumacher quote-unquote apologizing if fans felt disappointed, has narrativized the movie as a joke, a cameo we can bust out in a terrible Flash movie and go, "Hey, remember Batman and Robin?" And for a quick second, can I just say the audacity you have to do that when your film is The Flash? Like, on every technical metric, Schumacher's Batman films are better. There is no contest. And again, yes, I do include Batman and Robin here, a film that has been mired for years for forcing a creative reset of the Batman brand, and for taking the gonzo aspects of Forever to an obnoxious degree. But what if I told you that Batman and Robin does a lot of stuff well? Like the relationship between Bruce Wayne and Alfred. If Forever is an exercise in exploring the dichotomy of ego and alter ego, then Batman and Robin is about letting go, accepting that we can't control everything, but that it remains within our grasp to always do the right thing. There's this amazing scene between Clooney's Bruce, and he does a great job, unashamedly I'm saying that he is a good Batman, and Alfred, in which Schumacher lays down the aforementioned thesis. Bruce is struggling with the idea that he's about to lose his surrogate father to illness and his surrogate son to independence and the risks of the world. And what we get is about as perfect an analysis of Batman's creation and eventual metamorphosis that we've gotten on screen. Addressing Bruce, Alfred says that, quote, "Death and chance stole your parents, but rather than becoming a victim, you have done everything in your power to control the fates. For what is Batman, if not an effort to master the chaos that sweeps our world? An attempt to control death itself." Bruce replies, "But I can I?" To which Alfred says, "None of us can." So much of this film, and of course it gets buried under the campily enjoyable antics of Poison Ivy and Freeze and my own terrible impersonations, is invested heavily in that theme of letting go and moving with the tides, not letting the past control, but instead inform how we change. That's why Ivy and Freeze are kind of the perfect duo. One uses their transformation as a means of exacting earthly terror, emerging from her chrysalis and twisting repression into a toxic spill of rebellion. The other is consumed by loss and becomes a hateful person so that those may share his suffering, all while he tries to save the one he loves and eventually sees the light. Ignoring my own personal pro-Arnold Schwarzenegger biases for a second, this whole arc is derived from Batman the Animated Series' Emmy Award-winning episode, Heart of Ice. In no way is the film on the same level as Bruce Timm and Paul Dini's masterwork, but it's playing the same chords, and Arnie does an admirable job of balancing the levity of Schumacher's vision, here dialed up to another degree, and the tragedy that came with Freeze's reinvention. Thematic connotations of Batman and Robin aside, the main sticking point with this film is the tone and presentation. Going back to O'Donnell's comment on the film being a toy commercial, and yeah, there's no arguing with the fact that Forever and Batman and Robin were vehicles for merchandise, a direct response to controversy intended to accommodate a broader audience. Not just the freaks and weirdos who enjoyed seeing Danny DeVito being taken down Gotham sewers by penguin pallbearers, of which I happily count myself among. The freaks and sickos, I'm not a penguin in disguise. But even if the films were born out of a financial requirement, they were still drawing from the well of the character's source material. Batman is dark, but he's also light. Batman can carry guns and kill people, but he can also have a strict no-killing policy and travel backwards in time to fight dinosaurs. Chances are my Batman isn't your Batman, and that's the point I'm getting at with all of this. When we narrow down the definitions of what Batman can and can't be, we're left with something altogether less vibrant and interesting. But that's exactly what we've seen happen over the last 2 decades in live action, where the character is kept in the same dark, gritty box with little room to maneuver. Now, again, I love me dark Batman, but I much prefer to bask in the history of the character than to stay in just one zone. I have my favourite eras, the Grant Morrison everything is canon approach from the comics and Batman Beyond especially, but I also love pulpy Golden Age Batman, silly Silver Age Batman, and the definitive reset that was O'Neill and Adams' Bronze Age books. If we were to look at the character like he's superhero tapas, you wouldn't just order the paella and call it a day. You'd want some boccherones, or patatas bravas, or calamares con aioli. It's nearly lunch and I'm getting hungry, so I think I need to wrap this up. My whole point with all of this is that, yeah, Joel Schumacher's Batman is not for everyone. But that doesn't mean his films don't have any redeeming features or aren't valid as interpretations of the character. I liked them growing up, and today I can appreciate them for their operatic set design, their brilliant costume work, and their ability to thread nuance through their gonzo stylizations. Batman has been so many things to so many people in the course of his 80 years of existence, and Schumacher's films, while flawed, fit within that canon fairly neatly. You don't have to like them, but I think we're better off for them being around than we would be if they weren't. Because if superhero history has taught us anything, it's that having the same thing over and over, refusing to evolve and serving your audience the same stuff again and again, gets boring pretty quickly. So, thank you, Joel Schumacher. I think you made some pretty great movies. And those two Batman ones you did were very cool.